Good evening, and welcome to the Town Hall meeting in Ventura for the 19th District Senate race. This evening we're going to have a Town Hall meeting. We've invited guests to have their questions answered, as well as questions that have been prepared by our moderator. I am Bob Alviani, and I am chairman of the Ventura Chamber of Commerce Political Action Committee this year, and it's my honor to go ahead and introduce our candidates. This evening we have Hannah-Beth Jackson and Tony Strickland, and they will be speaking to all of you, answering why they want to be the next state senator for our district. We also have sponsors who have made this evening possible. Our sponsors include CAPS TV, Ventura College, the Ventura County Star, and the Ventura Chamber of Commerce Political Action Committee. So we thank you very much for being here, and we hope that you find this event worthwhile for your time. We also would like to recognize the interns who are assisting CAPS TV, the interns from El Camino High, and we'd like to go ahead and also recognize Ventura College for providing us the venue for this. It was very difficult to go ahead and arrange this evening, and they provided us with a great opportunity and forum. So I am going to go ahead and now turn the evening over to our moderator, who is editor and vice president of the Ventura County Star, Joe Howery. Thank you.
Everybody. What a wonderful turnout. I'm amazed, I'm shocked. I'm so proud of all of you for being here. What a great turnout. The event tonight, I've laid out some rules for the candidates. I've already established with them. We will start with a series of questions that I will ask. Each candidate will get 3 minutes to answer the question and then 2 minutes to respond. They will start with an opening statement at 4 minutes and a closing statement at 5 minutes. There's two portions of this forum tonight. The first portion is where I'm asking questions which have been submitted to me by the PAC and others, and some I've developed. And there's a second portion in which members of the audience will be invited to the microphone to ask questions as well. I know a lot of you have filled out cards. If time permits, I will try to get to those questions. However, it would be probably best if you really want to ask a question to try to get to the mic during that portion of the evening, okay? All right. We had a coin toss. This is, still doesn't work. We had a coin toss. Tony won it and deferred to Hannah-Beth. And so, as this works, Hannah-Beth chose to get the last word in, and so she will lead off opening statements. However, before we do that, a few rules, courtesy rules tonight. While I appreciate your enthusiasm and support, please hold your applause and cheering and signs of support until the end of the forum. Fair enough for everybody? Thank you, I appreciate that. There will be some ground rules for audience participation, and I'll go over those just before we start that section, okay? So let's begin. Hannah-Beth, kick it off.
Well, thank you. Can you can't hear, because I don't have a tie, so I just want to make sure that I don't need one. All right.
I'd love to give you mine.
I think it would go. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. I think this is very exciting that we are able to present to you our positions, introduce you to the things that we hold dear, and also have an opportunity to do an exchange with the community and introduce ourselves. Personally, for me, this is a great opportunity to be here with Joe Howry, who does a great job with the newspaper. I'm not so sure they're doing a great job here with the feedback, but we'll hope that they find their spot. Also want to thank CAPS. I want to thank the Chamber and all of you for being here. I was very honored to serve this area in the State Assembly from 1998 to 2004. My background as to how I got here, I started my career off as a prosecutor. I am an attorney by profession, and then going to politics, of course, some consider a lateral transfer. But I was honored to have a law practice right here in Ventura for over 20 years with my husband. And we practiced here. We bought a building downtown. We restored it because we really wanted to see that downtown area, this wonderful area, be redeveloped. We restored its old Victorian style, and have since seen very excitedly this whole community kind of re-energize. And I think for the Chamber, you're to be congratulated for participating in this. And I'm very delighted that my husband and I were able to give a little bit to the community at that point. Now, when I got to the state legislature, I actually was very proud to do more for the community. I recognized that when Ventura, when the freeway came in, the city of Ventura was isolated from the beach. And I know, as a business owner in this town, that there has to be a reconnection between those two. It's critically important. So I was able to get funding. We did the Figueroa Street underpass. I got money to try to fix that California Street off-ramp, which, of course, unfortunately, that money was lost because we weren't able to get everything coordinated fast enough. I got money to fix the Esplanade so people can enjoy that walkway. You know, when things are good for the community, they're good for business. And so I was very, very proud to be able to bring those kinds of things to the community, in addition to some ball fields out on the East End. I know Tony would be pleased to know that, because if you keep kids busy and participating in sports and recreation, it's a great way to keep them out of trouble. And that's something that I think is really important, that we give the community those options. I also passed a lot of legislation when I was in the Assembly that dealt directly with the concerns of the people of this community. I pride myself in the fact that I believe the responsibility of an elected official is to listen to the needs of the community and then go out and do good public policy for all the people in the state. That's why I did the bill on the Mound School. When parents came to me, their children were being poisoned by toxic clouds from pesticide applications. I was able to sit down with the agriculture community, and we were able to work out a measure so that we would protect their right to farm while protecting our children's health and safety. And for me, that is really important. The job, the fundamental role of government is to protect its people. So I was able to do that with the Mound School. It's a commitment that I will bring back to Sacramento with me to protect the public, to make sure we protect our families and not big corporations, that we do what's best for our community, for small businesses, for the people who live here, for our children, for future generations. These are the things that have been important to me as a legislator and will continue to be important when I get back to Sacramento. Thank you.
Tony?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy evening on a Friday night to join us to talk about the important issues facing California. I want to thank CAPS TV, the Ventura Chamber, as well as Joe Howry and the Ventura County Star for moderating this wonderful event. I think the most important issue facing the state of California is the economy. The most important issue facing the 19th Senate District and the nation as a whole. You know, I grew up here in the Central Coast. I grew up in Ventura County. I think it's up to every generation to leave your community in a better spot. My boy, we call him Tiny Tony. He just turned 1. My girl, Ruby Ruth, is going to turn 3 on October 15th. And my father was a career military soldier. And I learned from my parents that it's up to every generation to leave your state, your nation, and your local community in a better spot. Ventura County is a wonderful place, and my hope is to continue to make it a wonderful place to live. What's happening right now in the California legislature is the California legislature has become an economic development agency for states like Arizona, Nevada, Florida. A lot of people are leaving this beautiful environment, this beautiful community, to go to the middle of the desert. And the one reason why they're doing that is the act of California government. It hit home personally to my family. My brother, we're California natives. My brother grew up here in Ventura County. He wanted to stay in California. But he worked for Fidelity. Fidelity's national headquarters was in Santa Barbara, California. And a few years ago, Fidelity, CEO, looked at the business climate here in the state of California. He moved those thousands of high-paying jobs from here in Santa Barbara to Jacksonville, Florida. My hope is, by being a leader in Sacramento, to do whatever we can to make sure that doesn't happen. When Bill Foley was asked why he moved, he said the workers' comp situation here in the state, the high tax and the over-regulation here, Florida's government wanted us, California government didn't. You know, I think that's wrong, and what we need to do is have someone in Sacramento to fight for small business. I'm happy to actually have a public record. I served in the State Assembly from 1998 to 2004, and the differences in our opponent, me and my opponent, are stark. You do have a difference of opinion. I have tremendous respect for Hannah-Beth Jackson. It's not easy to run for office, and you know, she worked very hard. We just have a different way of looking at things. The California Chamber, who does a scorecard every year, our last year in office in 2004 gave me a 100% voting record. They gave my opponent a 7% voting record. The NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business, that represents small business, they gave me a 100% voting record. They gave my opponent a 0. And I think what we need to do is offer incentives and do whatever we can to continue to grow the California economy, to create high-paying jobs. One example is I'm currently vice president of a renewable energy company that's very popular, wave technology. Wave technology is very popular in Europe. They're ahead of us in renewable energy. Canada uses it. Australia uses it. I was on CNBC, a financial station, and they asked me, why is it so abundant everywhere else in the world, but in California's coast has some of the best places for wave energy? Why is this happening? My answer was government. The reason, by the way, I was brought into this company is you have to deal with 27 different federal, state, and local agencies in the permitting process. What we need to do is have leadership in Sacramento that works with private enterprise to speed that bureaucratic process and cut out that red tape. What we also need to do is, after we go forward in a lot of these companies, Google's and Wave Energy, when they are successful in getting that permitting process through, what will happen, if we don't have a California government that's responsive, what will happen is they'll manufacture in Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and other places. What we need to do, offer incentives, tax breaks for people who actually manufacture here in California. We can create thousands of high-paying green jobs, and when we create jobs, that will bring more money into the California government, and that's what we need to do. We need to have someone who will fight for business in California and make it more business-friendly. Thank you.
Tony, you're first up. What is your view of the role of government, and be specific as possible about how, if elected, you plan to translate that view into legislative action?
I think less government is better government, but government closest to the people is best for the people. I believe a lot of times we have this one-size-fits-all mentality. What's good for Ventura might not be good for Fresno, might not be good for Eureka or Los Angeles. What we have in Sacramento is a thought process that says we do it this one way, and we don't offer any flexibility to local communities. One example in terms of education. Right now, we might have a bill in Sacramento that says, we pass a new bill that says if your district, we'll pass a bill that says you get new textbooks for every district across the state of California. It sounds good, but the problem is if your local school district just bought a new textbook, it becomes a use it or lose it mentality. Either that you use it for new textbooks or you get nothing. So what will happen is every school district will use that funding for new textbooks even if they don't need it. What I would propose is that you send that money and block grant it to local school districts and let them decide what's needed in their local community, because you can change your local community representation far better than you can in bureaucracy in Sacramento or in Washington, D.C.
Hannah-Beth, 3 minutes.
Great. I think the role of government is manyfold. Government should partner with the private sector. Government needs to do some regulation of the private sector. I'll give you an example. Today, the United States Congress just instituted a $700 billion bailout. Why did we need a $700 billion bailout? Because government didn't do its job. Government did not regulate the subprime mortgage market. Government used to do that. And here in California, interestingly enough, there was an opportunity while we were in the legislature, Tony and myself, to do that kind of regulation. Not control, but regulate so that greed doesn't take over. Many of us who've been in the business world know that when we've applied for loans, we've had to meet certain stringent requirements so that the lender can be assured that those debts are going to get paid off. Well, what we saw in the year 2000 was a report that came out from the federal government that said there are these subprime loans being made by big banking institutions, and we need to get some control of those. And so in the California legislature, to try to gain some control over those measures right here in our state, there was a bill that was introduced in the Banking and Finance Committee that my opponent voted against that would have put some of those regulations and constraints in place. In fact, voted against it 3 times because the banking industry did not want any kind of regulation whatsoever. If we had started back in 2000, and by the way, I voted for that bill, if we had started back in 2000 with reasonable regulation, we would not find our economy in the conditions that it's in today. And I believe the role of government is to partner, but it also has a responsibility to check greed and to check irresponsible business that wants no controls, because as much as the free market's a great thing, you have to have some regulation over it, or else you're going to see what we've seen today. And my opponent failed to do what could have been done to try to gain some control by regulating those industries from doing what they've done to the people of our state and our nation.
Tony, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I mean, obviously the devil's in the details, and what we had was a subprime situation where we had predatory lenders will do anything possible to offer whatever loans possible. I think it was a situation where government created that problem. You know, government came in and asked these banks to say, hey, you need to make sure that these folks have a piece of the American dream. You need to do whatever you can to get them in their homes. And so what happened was the banks listening to government, they said, okay, we're going to offer these loans to people who actually couldn't afford the homes that they went into. And what happened was people wanted a piece of that action. People were making money. Joe Kennedy, who is John F. Kennedy's father, they asked him the question in his autobiography. They said right before the 1929 crash, he pulled out all his money before the 29 crash. And they said, well, why did you do that? He said, simple. When my shoe shine guy was giving me stock tips, I knew it was overinflated. And what happened was a lot of people went to try to get a fast buck, and they did whatever they can. The predatory lenders offered whatever possible to get zero money down. And a lot of folks tried to manipulate that market and jump into homes that they couldn't afford. And there's a lot of people at fault. But government started that process.
Hannah-Beth, 2 minutes.
Well, that's news to me. But what actually happened was the lenders decided they could start charging these subprime loans. They were encouraged to do so because there were you'd make more money if you could get someone who couldn't afford it into a loan that they couldn't pay. There was more money to be made for those mortgage brokers and those lenders. And that's where government needs to come in. When the private sector goes overboard, the government needs to come in and regulate. And you had the opportunity to help with that regulation. But the banking industry, who's given you a lot of money, said, we don't want any kind of regulation, and you voted against it. And that's the kind of thing that has led to the problems we have today. As I mentioned, we need a balance. We need to encourage the private sector. We also need to control the private sector with reasonable kinds of regulation so that there's oversight and accountability. And without it, you end up with a $700 billion bailout like the one we have today that's causing a lot of businesses and individuals to lose credit, and even the state of California. Today, it was indicated we may be in trouble because we can't even borrow money. That is something you trace right back to these institutions that got so greedy, and people who had the opportunity in government to put some kind of controls and constraints and refused to do it because the big banks and financial institutions didn't want it.
Hannah-Beth?
Yes, sir.
This year, 85 days after the state constitutionally mandated deadline, the legislature finally passed a state budget. The result was a state budget that no one was particularly happy with. Failure to pass a budget on time has become an annual right in California, with all sorts of unintended and inopportune consequences. What needs to be done to repair the process?
Well, what we need to do is what I tried to do when I was in the legislature, and that is to come together in a bipartisan fashion and to sit down and to figure out what are the values that we share and what is the vision that we share for California. It has become so difficult because what we've got now is a group that has insisted upon taking an oath that they will not sit down and try to negotiate. Now, negotiations, as anyone who's been in business knows, are a process where you give a little, you get a little. And at the end of the day, hopefully everybody goes home feeling like they've been heard. But what we've had during the last several years is an agenda that has simply refused to sit down and negotiate. When I was in the legislature, I worked with a bipartisan group at the same time that my opponent was bringing in the president of the Club for Growth, threatening the Republican members that if they didn't sign this oath and if they tried to compromise, they would defeat them when they ran for re-election. That kind of lack of cooperation has caused tremendous problems for this state, and I think it's really important that we try to work in a bipartisan fashion. We used to be able to do it when we had people of moderate viewpoints who understood that you can't get everything you want, and that if we want the state of California to have a high-quality education system, if we want the state of California to have the infrastructure necessary to create the jobs to stimulate our economy, if we want to have health care for people, if we want to make sure that people have the protections from our public safety people, whether it's our firefighters or our police officers, if we want to make sure we have all these things and protect our quality of life, these are things we have to sit down at a table and decide what we can afford and what we can't afford, what we're willing to give, what we're willing to take, what we're willing to do in the future. This notion that we've ended up with all this borrowing is really a tax on our children's future and our grandchildren's future. And I don't want to leave that kind of legacy to my children and grandchildren. They deserve better, the same way our parents did for us what it was that we expected them to do and what their parents had done in their generations. That Tony acknowledges, you know, it's our responsibility to leave the world a little better off than we found it. And if it means we have to sit down in a bipartisan way and leave our ideology at the door, that's what being a representative is all about. And I'm very proud of the work I did, and there are other things that we haven't done. I'll just mention briefly, I was able to commission an audit by the state auditor. California is the #1 donor state in the federal government. We give $50 billion more to the federal government in taxes than we get back in services. And if we could get back even just a percentage of that money, whether it's in agriculture or Medicare reimbursements or transportation funding that we get shortchanged, we would not have the budget shortfall we have. I'm going to go back and fight for that when I get back to Sacramento.
Tony?
Thank you. It is like Groundhog Day, the Bill Murray movie. What you need to do is have redistricting reform. Most of the members, if not all the members, will get reelected, and they know they'll get reelected no matter what they do. They're not being responsive to the constituents in their community. And when that happens, they know that they can hold out and they don't have to negotiate because they're all going to get reelected no matter if they do a good job or a poor job. Secondly, what we needed to do right after the recall was move forward on a spending cap that says you can only grow the government population plus inflation, and you can save money for a rainy day. By the way, if Arnold Schwarzenegger did this right after he got elected in the recall, we'd be operating a budget surplus today, not a budget deficit. And lastly, my opponent mentioned a bipartisan group, but what she failed to mention was that she was part of a progressive caucus where they had a secret meeting where they were actually talking when the mic was on, that no one knew the mic was on. They were talking about holding out the budget and actually putting pain on folks and let people see the pain of the holdout of the budget. And when they see the pain of the holdout in the budget, they would get rewarded politically and force the other side of the aisle to raise taxes. My opponent fails to mention that secret meeting, but bottom line is we need to be responsive. We need to do whatever we can. I think we need many reforms. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I believe that reforms only happen in tough times, and we absolutely need some reforms, and starting with #1 reform, and that's redistricting reform, Prop 11, that's on your ballot November 4th.
Hannah-Beth, 2 minutes?
Yes, thank you. Briefly, there was no secret meeting held. I know that my opponent and the folks on his side of the aisle tried to make a big deal out of a meeting that was held where a group of new and old members sat down, and for some of them it was the first time they had a budget problem, and I think someone posed what if. It was totally rejected out of hand, but That goes without being acknowledged. But when it comes to holding out on the budget, we have seen over the last several years, it's been this ideological group that's been spearheaded by my opponent that has refused to sit down and negotiate a reasonable budget. I agree we need redistricting. I actually am going against my own party on this. I am supporting Proposition 11. I think, unfortunately, we need to do a redistricting that allows for more moderation and less of this setting up your own boundaries so that you can protect your own seat. I think that that is not the way for democracy to function. I also believe we need a rainy day fund as well in this whole process, as well as some kind of a reasonable spending cap, as well as the ability to sit down and have people of goodwill willing to give and willing to take, as I mentioned. So I think the real key here is that we have to have people of goodwill who are willing to sit down together and recognize we need to get a timely budget that will advance the goals and the aspirations and inspirations of the people of this great state. The people deserve it, and it's our responsibility that they get it.
Tony?
I will just point out, Hannah-Beth Jackson was in that private meeting to talk about holding out the budget. Jackie Goldberg said we should hold up the budget and let people see across the state of California the pain of the people across the state. And when she had the opportunity to correct Jackie Goldberg, she was silent. And they talked about holding out the budget, putting pain on individual citizens across California for their political gain to raise taxes. And this term bipartisan, I believe in bipartisan, but you actually have to have ideas from Republicans and Democrats, not bipartisan, just Republicans do whatever the Democrats say. And that's the difference.
I'm going to do a quick follow-up. I'll give you each about 30 seconds, starting with Hannah-Beth. One idea has been floated as far as dealing with this is to lift the 2/3 majority requirement. I think California is only one of 3 states
Correct.
that requires a 2/3 majority to either pass taxes or pass a state budget. Where do you come down on the 2/3?
Before I get to
Requirement.
that, I would like to say that a member of that bipartisan group was Keith Richmond, who represented a bunch of people who may be in this room today, and I think he'd be terribly surprised to hear anyone accuse him of doing what Democrats say. He's a big guy. He's got a mind of his own. He's been a successful businessman, and he was part of that group. 2/3 requirement. I think that we used to be able to do that in this state because, as I said, people would get together and recognize they needed to compromise. We may have to look back at what we did before we created this 2/3 vote. We're one of 3 states, Rhode Island and Alabama, the other 2. We're too big a state to be putting ourselves in this position. I think we're going to have a bipartisan group that has been called for, a blue ribbon task force, to take a look at how this whole state functions, including the 2/3 vote. I think that's going to be very important. But I think one of the things that we should consider, I'm not saying I necessarily think this is where we should go, but you know, before we required the 2/3 vote, we simply required a majority vote if the increase in spending was less than 5%. If they were going to increase spending the state over 5%, it would require a supermajority. That's something we did in the 60s. That's one of the reasons that we actually got budgets done in a more timely fashion. It may very well be something that we need to consider again.
Tony?
First and foremost, Hannah-Beth Jackson talked about a group with Keith Richmond that's not the same group. Hannah-Beth Jackson was part of a progressive group that was in that meeting. Keith Richmond was not in that meeting. It was a group of progressive caucus members that talked about holding up that budget. Secondly, the 2/3 vote, I think the 2/3 vote is important to understand what would happen if you lifted the 2/3 vote and allowed the open government to, not the open government, but the Democrats in Sacramento do their will without a voice from the other side of the aisle. They opened up with a $15 billion tax increase to solve the problems of California. They wanted for young people to increase the iTunes tax. They want to increase the gas tax. They want to increase the income tax. They want to increase the sales tax, the car tax, to just name a few. The worst thing you can do in a tough economic time is raise taxes on hardworking California families. They're having a tough time right now to make ends meet. As acknowledged, with people having a tough time holding on to their homes, people having a tough time with higher gas prices. The worst thing you can do is have a across-the-board tax increase on everything that you can imagine. And a gas tax, by the way, falls disproportionately on those hardworking Californian families who are trying to make ends meet. If you lower that 2/3 threshold, that's exactly what you're going to get in terms of California, and that's the worst thing we could do to grow this California economy.
Tony?
Yes, sir.
The debate continues over what needs to be done to improve California's educational system. Many believe that the state is not spending enough, and as a result, California students are lagging behind the rest of the nation. Others contend that money alone is not the real culprit, but the entire system needs to be reformed. What do you believe needs to be done to improve the state's educational system?
First and foremost, what we need to do is make sure, again, we do invest in education, but understand that since Gray Davis has been elected governor of California, since that time we've increased government spending in education by 85%. The problem is that money hasn't got to the classroom, to the kids and the teachers. So what we need to do is have more oversight to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse, and then also do what I was talking about earlier, block grant that money to local school districts and do whatever we can to make sure the money gets in the classroom for the kids. There's no question that we need reform in education, and there's no question that we need to make sure that teachers have the tools that they need to make sure that they educate our kids, because that will grow our economy, making sure we have a well-educated workforce. And so what we need to do is offer not this one-size-fits-all mentality, but offer more resources to local school districts, and then do whatever we can to make sure that the money we do spend on education actually gets into the classroom for the kids.
Hannah-Beth?
Well, if that were only true, it'd be easy. But the fact of the matter is we are 46th, probably now closer to 48th or 49th as a result of this recent budget in what we spend per pupil. And when you have a $15 billion shortfall, you have a choice. Either you cut $15 billion or you try to find a way to be able to fund education. One of the things that I will do as soon as I get back to Sacramento is take a look at the fact that the oil companies in the state do not pay an oil severance tax. We are the only state in the country that allows oil drilling where we do not charge these companies for the privilege of taking out our oil. That would put $1.5 billion back into the budget right there. Let's put that money into education. We're 46th to 49th in what we spend per pupil. It isn't that the money isn't going into the classroom. That's just not true. We are last when it comes to the number of librarians. We are last when it comes to the number of counselors for our kids who are needing help. We are last in the number of public health people that work in our schools. We are last in the number of administrators that we have in our schools. The problem is we do not fund our schools properly. And you know, they say you get what you pay for. We are having a terrible problem in education in the state because we are not funding it adequately. And there are a number of things that we need to do to improve education. We do need to fund it better. We do need to create a 21st century curriculum because our youngsters today are competing in a global economy. They are competing with children who are getting the top education opportunities possible, whether it's through the internet, whether it's through the ability to interface with other cultures. We are not doing this. We are not teaching our children math and sciences to make them able to compete. And in order to do that, you have to fund the programs in order to get the results you need. We're not doing that. We need to do that. That's the kind of thing I will be looking at. Finding the funding necessary so that we can fund education. It's a responsibility that we owe to our children and our grandchildren.
Tony?
Again, since Governor Gray Davis has been elected, since he was elected back in 1998, we've increased government spending on education by 85%. I would venture to say that those children in those classrooms across the state of California haven't seen an 85% better educational system. I believe we are top-heavy and we need to reform education to make sure that we do whatever possible to make sure that money gets in the classroom to the kids. 4 of every $10 that comes in the state of California is mandated to go to K through 12 education. On top of that, most times it goes up to as high as half. 50 cents of every dollar will go into education. The bottom line is we haven't made sure that that money gets in the classroom to the kids, and we need to do whatever we can to have people that are willing to ask those tough questions. We talk about funding sources. Funding sources of my opponent will not work to reform education. By the way, I authored a bill for merit pay for teachers. Teachers that move their classes on average 1 year, they would get an extra bonus when we had a surplus. On top of that, I wanted to offer more money to math and science teachers, and it was killed by a union that supports my opponent because they said, we can't treat teachers differently. You're saying that there's good and bad teachers. Well, there are good and bad teachers. We need to do whatever we can to promote teachers, and we need to do whatever we can to make sure that money gets in the classroom. I would offer tax credits and tax incentives or tax credits for teachers they can write off, like a lot of small businesses could do with their gases and so on and so forth. Any teacher that uses any of their own money from their pocket for educational supplies, we need to make sure that those teachers get reimbursed, and we need to do whatever we can to attract the best and brightest in terms of what I authored in terms of extra pay for science and math teachers, because it is a global economy. We have to not only compete with Arizona, Nevada, and Florida, we have to compete on a global stage, and that only happens when we invest in education. But on top of that investment, we need to make sure that that investment gets to the classroom to the kids.
Hannah-Beth?
Well, I think that's a great bill to give tax incentives to teachers for supplies and materials they supply for their school children. And in fact, it's a bill that I authored and got passed while we were in the Assembly. I don't know if you voted for it at the time, but that bill actually exists in law today. But I'll tell you what happens with that bill. I think it's a great idea, and I think we need to honor our teachers. They work very hard. They're responsible many hours of the day for our children. We look to them to help them so that they're going to be able to compete in a worldwide economy. What happened is my opponent's side of the aisle last year during the budget negotiations forced that tax credit to be suspended, but in exchange for, I should say. So that tax credit had to get suspended so that we could continue a tax credit for yacht and airplane owners, so that when they buy their airplanes and their yachts and keep them out of the state for 90 days, they get to bring them into the state without paying sales tax. We had to agree to that to get a budget passed last year in exchange for our teachers losing their tax credit for their supplies and materials they supply to the schools. So you have to ask yourself, where in the world are our priorities here? Obviously, the Republican side of the aisle insisted that we help the rich, and on our side of the aisle over here, we wanted to give those teachers an opportunity and honor them for the work they do. You know, a small business person, if you spend money for your business, you get to deduct it as a business expense. Teachers don't get to do that. This bill was a small bill that said thank you for the hard work you do, and it was the Republican side of the aisle that terminated that bill. So when I get back to Sacramento, they're not going to get away with that again. I think teachers deserve that credit, and they've worked too hard and they do too much for our students to lose that opportunity.
Hannah-Beth, as we begin the process of implementing California's global warming bill and encounter the real costs involved, given the state of the economy, do you favor forging ahead or slowing down the timetable? Also, are the goals realistic, or do they place California at a competitive disadvantage?
Well, the author of that global warming bill just happens to be in the back of the hall right now, Fran Pavley, with whom I worked on a number of these bills and was proud to co-author a number of them. I think the time is now. The opportunity is terrific. California to take the lead in developing the green economy. When I was in the legislature, I was the principal co-author and the co-author of two of the most important bills dealing with alternative energy and global warming. And those bills were to create a market and to create incentives so that we would be able to develop those technologies and have a buyer for those technologies. My opponent, who's running as this alternative energy expert, voted against those bills, which would have created the marketplace for us. We need to create those incentives. We need to do what we can to encourage companies to come to California. You know, I was talking to some of the folks who are in the main office of Google, who run the Google office. I said to them, you know, we keep hearing about jobs leaving the state. Why are you still in California if this is such an expensive place to do business? And their answer was, because this is where the talent is. This is where the talent is. With our educational system, with the research that we do at the great University of California, with the kind of young people we have and that entrepreneurial spirit, this is the place they want to be to develop the 21st century economies. And I'm very proud to have worked on this kind of legislation, because in our economic times, as difficult as they are today, this is the future. We need to become energy independent. In fact, I did a forum down at Cal State Channel Islands, the first public forum at that university back in the early 2000s, where we talked about exploring California as the home of the green technologies, the new economy. And we were able to bring people together. This is eminently doable. And the legislation that I promoted, the legislation I co-authored, which we got signed into law to encourage this, was what we need to move us forward. My opponent voted against every one of those bills.
Well, we do have a different philosophy in terms of how you accomplish a goal. My opponent wants fees, fines, penalties, and mandates. and I offer incentives and rewards and credits. You know, I'm father of 2 children, and you actually get a better response from kids when you offer rewards versus timeouts. And what the problem is my opponent will always talk about these mandates and always talk about penalties and fines. What I'm doing in terms of green technology is offer whatever we can do in terms of speed up that fast track in the permitting process, offer incentives in terms of manufacturing here in California. What my opponent offers is nothing but mandates, and if you don't reach those goals, we're going to fine you and penalize you. The problem is you're putting the cart before the horse. We have this mandate that we have to be, you know, have a certain percentage of renewable energy. However, but you're not giving the tools to the people to actually accomplish those goals. It's sort of like John F. Kennedy saying in the beginning of his inaugural speech back in 1961, saying we're going to man on the moon by the end of the decade, but we're not going to fast track any permitting process. We're not going to allow you to have the tools to test rockets, but we expect you to get to the moon. That's what's going on with the legislature. A lot of times what people like my opponent do is they say, we pass this mandate on you, and if you don't get this reward, if you don't get this done, we're going to fine you. But they won't help to move forward on the tools to actually allow private enterprise to actually accomplish those goals. Those goals. So I think it's essential to understand that we do have a difference of philosophy. My opponent's of fees, fines, penalties, and mandates, and mine's incentives, rewards, and credits.
Well, obviously, my opponent didn't read the bills, because those bills that that I authored and co-authored and we got into law actually talk about incentives and creating a marketplace and giving tax credits. One for $270 million in tax credits if people will go out and develop the tools and develop these renewable energy technologies. So obviously he didn't read the bill and also didn't vote for them. There were a number of them. They were a package of bills. They were a great opportunity. They led the nation in trying to create incentives for renewable energy. The bills that now, and in fact, while we were in the legislature, my opponent brought people in and supported these forums, I think the Pacific Research Group, that denied that we even had global warming. I mean, he was a global warming denier when we were in the legislature. And, you know, you're not going to do anything if you don't think there's a problem. You are running contrary to 99% of all the scientists out there who know we have a global warming problem as we see the ice melting in our Arctic and so forth. So you have to be honest about the fact that if you don't believe that there's global warming, then you're not going to support these bills. But when it comes to fees, fines, penalties, and mandates, I don't know what bills you're looking at, but the bills that we authored really provide incentives. They encourage the private sector. They encouraged our utilities to develop them. And guess what? We're even ahead of the game. Because we gave them these incentives, because we told them this is the future, we are actually going to be able to be more energy efficient in a lesser period of time than before. We now see some of these big companies, as the price of gasoline goes up, that on their own are creating these kinds of tools. We're going to see electric cars back. Of course, they killed the electric car earlier, but we're going to get these vehicles back because people understand the importance, and they understand that the marketplace is ready for it, that government is there to be supportive, that the private sector is there. We're creating the marketplace and market share, and we're on our way.
I will just say that I obviously read the bill, and obviously you need to read your own bill, because every one of those bills had penalties. You know, the bottom line is you have to give private enterprise the tools to accomplish those goals. My opponent did not give tools. My opponent thought it was good to offer mandates and penalties, and what we need to do, it did have tax credits, I'll give you that, but it didn't go about the right way. What we need to do is make sure that you give the tools for those folks. Again, I'm vice president of this renewable energy company. You have to deal, the reason why they brought me into this company is you have to deal with 27 different federal, state, and local agencies. PG&E has a project right to the north of us, and their hope is to be online by 2011. If we fast-track that permitting process, we can actually be ahead of the game even further than we are today. And I do believe we need to be energy independent. I do believe we need to get off of foreign oil, and I do believe that's the way that you grow this California economy, by increasing green technology, green jobs, high-paying jobs, and offer incentives to manufacture here in the state of California. That's how you solve your economic problem in the state of California, is you have a government that actually understands what private enterprise challenges are to achieve those goals.
I'm sure this won't disappoint anybody, but my mic is dead.
Okay. Tony,
Yes, sir.
Californians feel they pay enough taxes already and question the accountability of how tax money is being spent. The state faces tremendous challenges in the years to come, and the demands for more revenue are only going to increase. Will you support increased taxes to meet the demand, or are there other solutions?
The answer is no. The worst thing you could do is raise taxes on. We are already taxed enough here in the state of California, and what we need to do is do whatever we can to reform the state. Again, if we had a spending cap when Arnold Schwarzenegger came in right after the recall, we would have a budget surplus today, not a deficit. What we need to do is have a zero-based budget to open up the entire budget every year to look at every program, because what's happening right now is we pass a bill and that becomes the baseline for next year's bill. What we need to do is open up the entire budget every year and look at to make sure, are these programs actually accomplishing the goals that everybody said that they were going to accomplish when they passed that legislation. And then there's one bill that says that people are not serious about solving the problems of the fiscal problems of California. Every year I was up in the legislature, there's these 14 boards and commissions across the state of California where people get paid over $100,000 a year and they show up to their job once a month. Now I know what you're saying. Dan Goodwin would say, hey Tony, get me one of those jobs. Who wouldn't want one of those jobs? The problem is average citizens don't serve on these boards and commissions. They're legislators who are termed out so they can have a nice soft landing, political insiders. When I voted to repeal those, to actually pay those commissioners nothing but per diem, so they actually did it for government service, my opponent voted against that. What we need to stop is the political paybacks. By not reforming that, that tells me that they're not serious in Sacramento about reforming what's going on, because people are working hard for $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year paying their taxes, and it is highly unfair for legislators who are termed out to have a nice soft landing and get over $100,000 a year to show up their job once a month. I voted to get rid of those political paybacks. My opponent voted to keep them.
You know, with a $15 billion shortfall, when you start looking at 14 boards and commissions that might end up costing $2 million, this isn't the answer to the problem. And I'm not going to argue about what these boards and commissions do, but if we're really serious about trying to close a shortfall in the state of California, we have to look at the way we both provide services and the way we take in revenues. The fact of the matter is we have a series of tax loopholes out there for big corporations that may have been valuable 20 years ago when they were initiated. These are what we call tax expenditures. But basically, what we're doing in the state of California today is we're giving some of these big, huge, major multinational corporations tax credits for sending our jobs offshore. They get benefits for that. I think what we need to do is take a look at a lot of these tax credits that we're giving to these multinational corporations and ask ourselves, are they accomplishing any goals for the state of California? Have they outlived their usefulness? I mean, it was astounding to me when I learned that there are companies that do business in California that not only don't pay taxes, we give them our taxpayer money at the end of the year for the privilege of them making money here in California. That's a crazy system. But my opponent won't support those kinds of closing of tax loopholes. We've tried for years to try to create an oil severance tax on these companies that are drilling our oil. Now, you want to talk about significant reform. Let's talk about reforming and forcing these people like they do in Alaska, Florida, Louisiana, and Texas. They pay an oil severance tax, but not in this state, and that would put $1.5 billion into our coffers. Now, $1.5 billion to me, that's real money, and those are the kinds of things that we need to be doing, and we need to get money back from the federal government. That's another critically important process. As I say, when I get back to Sacramento, we're going to explore some of the other areas where the federal government takes our money and doesn't give us back our fair share.
Tony?
Sorry.
It is wrong for people who work hard, pay their taxes, and have political insiders get over $100,000 a year and show up to their job once a month. I voted to get rid of them. My opponent voted to keep them. On top of that, you know, $1 million here, millions there. Pretty soon you're going to talk about real money. And in terms of the big issues that Hannah-Beth Jackson was talking about, I just talked to you about those big issues. Zero-based budgeting, to open up the entire budget to make sure that the money is being spent wisely. And a lot of times people talk about these programs are going to do great things. Let's look and see, make sure that those programs are doing what they're intended to do when we pass them. And then the spending cap says you can only grow the government population plus inflation, and you save the rest of the money for a rainy day fund. You as a family member save money, you put money in your savings for tough economic times. What we need to do in Sacramento is the same thing that you do in your everyday life. And again, after the recall, if Arnold Schwarzenegger and the legislature passed the spending cap, we'd be talking about a surplus today in California, not a deficit. That is solving the problem, the fiscal problems of California, and we need to do whatever we can. But people are not taking this seriously if they're not willing to get rid of their friends' political paybacks at $100,000 a year and they show up once a month. It is wrong. I don't care if it's 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. It is wrong for people to work hard for their money, earning $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. And these people who want a nice soft landing earn over $100,000 a year, show up their job once a month, so you can pay for those political insiders. That is wrong.
Excellent. Well, we've come to the end of my portion of this. Now it's your turn. And since I've got the microphone, I'm in control. And what I'd prefer to do is, rather than just stick the microphone on the stand, I'd like to wander around a bit and really make this a town hall meeting. And that allows me to keep control of the microphone. So I'm seeing some hands, so I'm going to go out. There's just a few rules. Please, I don't want any speeches or, statements, respectful questions. And I'm sure you'll do that. And let's give it a whirl. Here we go.
I would like to ask both candidates, I know we're in a budget deficit. How do each one of you candidates propose that we deal with the budget deficit to get into a surplus situation?
Hannah-Beth, I'm going to let you start.
Well, I think that it is important that we take a look at how we spend money. That was the first part of my last comment that I didn't elaborate on. I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I think we do have to look at the programs and the services that we provide in the state of California. And I think we have to ask ourselves, just the same way we do on these tax breaks that we're giving to big multinational corporations like Chevron and the big banks and so forth that are my opponent supporters. I think we have to look at the way we do business in this state. Do we have programs in place, services that we're providing that are meeting their expectation? Are they doing what they were intended to do? And if they're not, we're going to cut them out. If they can be operating more efficiently than they are, we make them more efficient. I think we have to work both sides of that balance sheet. And in doing so, we also have to ask ourselves, what are the priorities for this state for the future? If you keep cutting out important programs like education, sure, we may be at a zero deficit. We may not have a deficit. We also have the most poorly educated children who aren't going to be able to generate the economy for this state that will both generate jobs, generate the revenues necessary to keep the state going, to rebuild our infrastructure, to make sure that the education system offers the best opportunity to live the American dream, to make sure we have health care, to make sure our public safety people are able to do their job, to make sure we can enforce our environmental laws and protect our quality of life and keep our air clean and our water clean. We have to go and ask these very difficult questions, and in the process, the answers that we come up with are going to create the priorities that we then use as we go forward, both in terms of what we spend and what we bring in.
Okay, Tony?
If we initiate a spending cap that says you can only grow the government population plus inflation, you save money for a rainy day, we would have a surplus today, not a deficit, if it was implemented right after the recall when Arnold Schwarzenegger got elected. Zero-based budget, I think it's important to look at the entire budget to make sure that we make sure that all the programs are worth funding. Much like you have to do in your everyday family. When times are tough at your home, you're going to look at your everyday family budget and you're going to say, you know what, obviously you're not going to cut out paying your mortgage, you're not going to cut out providing food for your children, but you're going to start looking at your checkbook and you're going to say, maybe I don't go out to eat as much, or maybe we don't have as much an entertainment fund to go out to the movies. That's what we need to do in California government. We don't need a California government, by the way, that treats the people across this state as a personal ATM. Instead of making those reforms, instead of looking deep to say, where are our priorities? What happens, my opponent and others, they look at you as a personal ATM for the programs of every program that you're talking about. If we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep having this budget deficit year in and year out. We need meaningful reforms to open up the entire budget. We need a zero-based budget, and we need to make the priorities like everyday families make in their family budget.
Okay, got a question right here?
Thank you. My question's for both of you. I'm relatively new to California. I came just prior to the recall election. Coming from my other state here, I was really shocked at the difference that the my income went down once I became a California resident. I'm wondering, Ms. Jackson, the things that you've said tonight sound really good. I'm almost ready to take my shirt off.
Please feel free to do that. Yeah.
Question. At least since '98, haven't the Democrats been in charge of the legislature? Haven't both senators, for the United States senators, been Democrats to bring federal funding into California? Hasn't your party been able to obtain these goals that you've espoused? And how is it that such a small minority as the Republicans are able to block all these things that you've said you'd like to do but have not been able to accomplish?
Well, I think there's a very, I'm not quite sure of the whole nature of the question, but I will tell you that part of the problem is that we have a 2/3 vote requirement on the budget. And that is a perfect opportunity for nobody to take responsibility. What happens is the Republicans look at the Democrats and they say, well, you're the party in power, you make the decisions. The Democrats look at the Republicans and say, well, we need your votes to pass a budget. So everybody's pointing the fingers at everybody else, and nobody has to take responsibility for the budget. It used to be in California that the majority had to take responsibility for the budget. And if the public didn't like it, they had the ballot box to tell them that they weren't happy with it. Now, everybody blames everybody else. The Democrats proposed a budget with this $15 billion shortfall that cut $8 billion out of the state's budget. There's $7 billion left. They proposed that we needed to do something to try to increase some of the revenues. The Republicans still put their hands across their chests and said no. And so the Democrats said, well, you tell us what you want to cut. And the Republicans said, well, you're the party in the majority, you tell us. And we had a stalemate for 85 days, which cost the good people of this state good tax money. Now, I want to respond to this ATM question. I'm a taxpayer. I don't like paying taxes any more than anybody else does. But if my money's going to go to things that are going to help us, like making sure when we have the fires in Ventura County as a result of the droughts that we have, I want to make sure that I've got the best firefighters, best equipped, best trained out there who are going to protect my home and my property. I want to make sure if we have problems with gangs that we've got the best trained police forces out there to protect us. I want to make sure that when it comes to my drinking water, I want to make sure we have assured that that drinking water isn't going to be filled with things like arsenic or, like in Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks, the potential of perchlorate in the drinking water. A bill that I did to try to protect against that happening, which my opponent voted against. I want to make sure that we are able as a state to educate our children so that they have the chance to compete in this worldwide economy. I want to make sure that Channel Islands is a school that gets to grow. It's a great opportunity for the people of this great community to have their own top quality 4-year educational institution. Back when we first started having these budget problems in the early 2000s, they were going to pull the entire money that the university was going to have to open its doors and keep them open. I fought hard and kept that money open for Channel Islands. I want to see that community grow. I want to see us having our children educated there. I want to see us have vocational training and technical training so we can develop that green economy and make California the home to the new technologies. These aren't things that happen on a prayer. They happen because we're willing to commit our resources to them. And that's what I'm going to do when I get back to Sacramento. I'm going to keep working in those things. We also have some shirts in the back if you'd like to change your shirt. You know?
Tony?
Well, my guess is he's not changing that shirt. And then,
Come on.
you know, we are one of the highest tax states in the union. There's no question. We're taking more of your money than ever before, and we're getting less in terms of services. We don't have an infrastructure that's set up for a current population. We have an infrastructure set up for the 1960s population. That's why I'm talking about a spending cap, but that's also why I'm talking about opening up the entire budget, like I talked about your family budget, to look at everything. Obviously, my opponent is talking about public safety. I think the most essential role of government is public safety. Because if you don't feel safe in your homes, in your streets, in your schools, everything else we talk about, we might as well not even talk about. But to answer your question, we're one of the highest tax states in the country. And then on top of that, when my opponent starts talking about nice terms like increased revenue, What does that mean? Increased revenue. What does that mean? Then it means raising your taxes. She doesn't want to say it, but when she says increased revenue, the code word is she's going to raise her taxes. The problem with my opponent is she likes to spend your money, and she'll come back to you as a personal ATM for all these programs instead of doing what we have to do, and that's to look at the priorities of the state of California. And also, my opponent talks about, the fact that the Republicans won't do this or the Republicans won't do that. I will tell you, we need to work in a bipartisan way. Reform only comes when we have tough times. Hopefully we can come back and work as Democrats and Republicans to say we need a spending cap. The problem was when we kept on proposing the spending cap, my opponent and others would say no. We need to only grow the government population plus inflation. We need to save money for a rainy day fund. And the problem is when we have a booming economy, when the economy is strong, which it's not now, when the economy is strong, California government matches the spending instead of saving that money for a rainy day. And the biggest problem is we do have the highest tax rate, and people are now leaving the state because they want to do business somewhere else. And what we need to do is look at our spending priorities and figure out what we need to fund, and also look at where we need to say, well, maybe that's good in economic when the economy's going well, but that's certainly not something we should fund in a bad economy. Instead of raising taxes in a bad economy is the worst thing you can do because people are having a tough time to make ends meet.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a student here at Ventura College, and I'm wanting to go to a college, one of our fine colleges here in California afterwards, and I'm wondering what are you going to do to make sure that students aren't going to go into debt to go to the college that they want to?
Well, it seems like I'm still paying off my debt for college. I'm still kind of young. I mean, it's an investment in the future. What we need to do is make sure that those who are having a tough time on economics with their personal family budget get things like the Cal grants and do whatever we can to make sure that students who want a good quality education can actually make sure that they have the resources to, do whatever they can to get that top-notch educational system. I've always fought against, by the way, increasing your community college fees. I think balancing the checkbook on the backs of young people when community colleges are really a jewel of the California educational system, and actually they're defunded a lot of times because they're not treated as a university system, they're not treated as a CSU system, and a lot of times community colleges are left out in the cold. So what I would do is make sure that we don't increase your fees, and we also need to do something in terms of what's going on in terms of your books. Sometimes your books are more expensive than your credits. So we need an oversight to do whatever we can to make sure that the books aren't a total monopoly, that you're not paying more in your books than you are in your actual credits, what you pay for going to school.
Hannah-Beth?
Yeah, I want to be real clear. I have been talking about looking at what these multinational corporations pay and what the oil companies pay. My opponent doesn't respond to that. I have no interest, and I will not support any tax increases for the middle class. We are all paying a big tax to the oil companies for the privilege of them drilling their oil here and for us buying their gasoline. Unfortunately, that money doesn't come back to us. That goes to these huge profits that the CEOs are making. $12 billion in the first quarter alone the oil companies made. None of that money came back to us. Those are the taxes that we're paying. My opponent gets his funding from those people, gets his campaign contributions from those people. I think what we need to do is we need to make them pay their fair share. My opponent talks about infrastructure. You're not going to develop, we've got a 1960s infrastructure. He's absolutely right about that. We need to improve that infrastructure. It's now 50 years later. How are you going to do that? How are you going to pay for that? How are we going to let this young man go on and get his college degree without becoming so burdened by debt he doesn't have a prayer of living the great American dream? How are we going to do that? Who's going to pay for that? Textbooks. Who's going to regulate textbooks? I thought my opponent didn't believe in any kind of regulation. I mean, these all sound really good, and when you get into budget negotiations, this is what happens. We hear from our friends who are on the other side of the aisle, we don't want to cut any of these programs, but we don't want to pay for them either. And that's where you have to sit down and make the hard calls. And I think the hard calls are getting our money back from the feds, getting these companies to pay their fair share. Let's talk about real money. Let's talk about the billions of dollars that these companies don't pay in taxes. Let's talk about the billions of dollars that we don't charge to these kinds of companies. Let's make sure California gets its fair share, and we can give this young man the education he deserves and is working hard to get.
First of all, I never said I didn't believe in any regulation. That's something that my opponent keeps trying to say, that I don't believe in any regulation. That's false. Secondly, she also said, I'm not going to raise your taxes, but it's different from her record. In fact, the Tax and Jackson quote came from her hometown paper, the Santa Barbara News Press, and they came forward with that title because she voted to implement a local income tax. So on top of what you pay in your state income tax, on top of what you pay in your federal income tax, my opponent wanted to make it easier for localities to raise your income tax, to allow a local income tax. And then she's also voted 3 times, not once, 3 times, to weaken Proposition 13. And that's not said just by me. That's said by Governor Gray Davis in his veto message on a bill, AB 94. That's said by John Capal, president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, AB 81, AB 822, and AB 94. She voted 3 times to weaken Proposition 13. Before Proposition 13, seniors on fixed incomes were being taxed out of their homes. The worst thing you could do is increase taxes, and my opponent wants to make it easier for you to pay more in local income taxes, weaken Proposition 13, and raise the taxes and treat you like a personal ATM, and I think that's wrong, especially when we're in a state when we have one of the highest tax burdens already.
Well, I have to respond to that because that statement is totally false. It is about as real. It's about as real as the Wave Energy Company that my opponent claims to be a vice president of, which has no money, no employees, no income, and no technology. Even Ventura County's own former taxpayer chief, Jerry Robigs, has said, I have never voted to raise Proposition 13. In fact, Proposition 13 can only be raised by a vote of the people. My opponent should know that. Maybe he does. But if he doesn't, he should read Prop 13. It can only be increased by a vote of the people. The people funding my opponent, the insurance industry, the big financial institutions, the oil companies and all, they would like you to believe that because they know that I'm going to protect the interest of families. I'm going to protect our state from the kinds of behaviors that have led to this subprime problem that's destroying our national economy. The statement made by Governor Davis was not that this does affect Prop 13. He said one could perceive. Now, unfortunately, Governor Davis isn't here anymore. He was recalled because most people didn't give much credibility to what he had to say anyway. But he never said this. He said he was concerned that one might perceive it as such. The fact of the matter is that that legislation was confirmed by the state Supreme Court. It said this is not a violation of Prop 13. So I know my opponent would like everybody to believe that. I support Prop 13. I want to be real clear about that. I don't want to see our seniors losing their homes. I have never voted for a weakening of it, and I will never vote for it. I'm sorry that my opponent doesn't like that answer, but those are the facts. And whether some newspaper, and those of you from the Santa Barbara area know about that local newspaper, and, you know, I should have followed my mother's advice when I got married to take my husband's last name, so I no longer have the last name Jackson that does rhyme with taxon. It would be Eskin, and I don't know what that rhymes with. But the fact of the matter is my opponent is unwilling to tax and to close those tax loopholes of those big multinational corporations that are funding his campaign.
Well, you know, just to respond, that's just not accurate. Read Gray Davis's veto message. Okay. Obviously, if Hannah-Beth Jackson wants to see it, I'll send it.
Okay, okay.
And hold on, no.
Tony, okay. Come on.
All right.
No, please. You sit down, or you can leave if you'd like. You know, we don't want to hear any more from you until November 4th. That's the only time I want to hear your opinion. Thank you. Okay. We just have a ton of people who want to ask questions. So I'd kind of like to do this in rapid fire. If you could limit your answers to no more than 90 seconds. Okay? Fair enough. Fire away.
The environment is a big issue right now, and I know both of you are environmentalists, and was wondering if you could speak to the 3 bills you are most proud of and what they have done for us, that you voted for a while in the Assembly.
On the environment?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm very proud of my record on the environment. In fact, I have almost 100% voting record by the California League of Conservation Voters. I'm endorsed by them. I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club. I was actually one of the leaders in fighting for the environment. I passed legislation to protect our drinking water, to make sure that we are able to identify when we have toxins in that drinking water. My opponent voted against it. I did the bill to protect our children from pesticide drift that happened right here in Ventura at the Mound School. My opponent voted against it. I did legislation, as I mentioned, on alternative energy to try to develop it, create the marketplace, create incentives, give rebates for people using it. My opponent voted against it. I'm the only candidate in this race who truly has an environmental record. I'm real proud of it, and I have always looked at the environment as 2 critical things. One is a quality of life issue, which is why I helped maintain open space for the County of Ventura, allowing them to vote on the ability to have open space. I also did legislation, I was saying that I'm very proud of my record because I think the environment is both a quality of life issue and a public health issue, and I will fight very hard to make sure that we have clean water to drink, clean air to breathe, that we leave that legacy to our children, and we protect our magnificent coastline and community that we were so blessed to have available to us.
Tony?
I co-authored the sales tax credits for solar energy right during the energy crisis. I've authored clean water bills. In fact, that's why Aaron Brockovich, consumer advocate, also a Democrat, says I vote for the person, not the party. And then also, I'm supported by Solar Energy Business Coalition. And the reason why they support me is because they know that I understand, as a vice president of a renewable energy company, that Hannah-Beth keeps talking about the reality. She doesn't want to admit that we're actually doing something in the private sector to try to grow the green economy. And she says, well, we have no product. You know, GreenWave is not a product-oriented company. In fact, GreenWave is a business that moves through the rigorous government process, something that the manufacturers of the wave energy don't want to go through that cumbersome process. So it's a win-win situation. They create the technology, but they want business out there that can go through, and that's why Google and others, Chevron just went into a project with a company just like mine up in Eureka, and it's a good fit. We're going to do whatever we can to bring those high-paying jobs and work with the folks who actually manufacture the wave technology, and it's a win-win for California.
Sir?
Yes. Given that recently a federal judge has threatened to take some $8 billion out of the state treasury to enforce prison reform, where do you guys stand on prison reform?
First and foremost, I'm opposed to the prison hospital that Kelso wants to put into Camarillo. And we need to do whatever we can to fight to make sure that that is not put into our community across the street from a school and a bedroom community. There's other places across the state that would want that. And in terms of the health care, we already have a tough time for health care providers for our everyday residents. And by implementing this prison hospital, your health care will be jeopardized. And that's why I've given $10,000 to the fight to do whatever we can to stop this prison hospital from being built here in Ventura County. Now, into your larger question, in terms of the prisons, naturally what's going to happen is we have a growing population across the state of California. And after we passed 3 strikes, what happened was we have an increased prison population. And with the increase of California population, just by percentages, you're going to have an increased prison population because we have a growth in our California population. So what we need to do, I'm one that supports 3 strikes, that said it's good to put criminals behind bars and not release them early out into our community with our kids, out in our neighborhoods. And so what we need to do is invest in the infrastructure to make sure that we do whatever we can to put the bad guys behind bars. But also we need to invest in preventative programs to do what we can to make sure that those people don't get into the prison situation in the first place. I'm supported by the Crime Victims United. I'm also author of a proposition on the ballot today that invests in those prevention programs that we're trying to invest in.
Well, I also, I don't think we should be putting that prison hospital in Camarillo, and I actually wrote an op-ed piece at several weeks before my opponent came out in opposition. I think the people of Camarillo clearly have made their concerns known. I think they're legitimate concerns. I've talked to Mr. Kelso myself expressing those concerns, in fact, just this past week. I think there are other places where they want the hospital, and that's where they should be focusing to put the hospital. As far as prison reform goes, you know, I'm a former prosecutor. I started off my legal career prosecuting violent criminals. I also did a number of bills when I was in the legislature dealing with crime victims and dealing with violent crime, which is why I have the support of every law enforcement group in this district. The Ventura County Deputy Sheriff's Association, the Chief of Police of the City of Ventura, the former Chief of Police of the City of Ventura, Chief of Police of the City of Oxnard, Santa Barbara Deputy Sheriffs, the Sheriff, the Republican Sheriff of Santa Barbara County, because they know how hard I've worked on areas to protect against criminals in our community. We need to do more to prevent crime, and we need to start right at the earliest stages of children coming into our schools. We know by the time they're in first grade, those children who are at risk. We need to address those problems. We need to invest in programs that deal with the fact that 75% of all men in our prisons today are learning disabled. If we could deal with those problems early, we wouldn't be spending $45,000 a year to warehouse someone in prison and only $7,800 a year to educate our children. We need to do more at the earliest possible stages. Again, that's why I have the support of the entire law enforcement community, rank and file folks in this district. I also have PORAC's endorsement. I'm very proud of the support I've gotten from our law enforcement people.
Next.
First of all, thanks for being here tonight. Appreciate this. I've been a state employee for 11 years. Before that, I worked in the legislature. I was there right at the end of, right before Gray Davis came into office, and then I went to work for the state. I started out with the golden days of the state where we had a surplus in this state. In just a few short years, Gray Davis as governor, we were in a deficit. Runaway spending, locking in some of the highest prices of energy the state has ever seen. You were there, Hannah. Tony, you were instrumental in getting Gray Davis out of office, and I applaud you for that. Hannah, your constituents want to put you back in office. They want to make you a senator. What are you going to do next time there's a governor that is just blatantly spending money without thinking it through and trying to lock in prices that are smart and good for Californians?
Well, I'm not sure if the question deals strictly with energy. I'm going to make sure we don't have another energy crisis. The first thing I am going to do is continue to promote California conserving energy. By the way, the problem with energy was a result of the deregulation program that happened, I'm afraid, while you were in Sacramento under Governor Pete Wilson. Back in 1996, when the whole energy system was deregulated in the dead of night. One of the last bills, apparently, to be considered. That created the crisis that we have when we got gamed by Enron and folks like that who were unmitigated greed. They took over and they basically brought California to its knees. That didn't happen on my watch. That happened as a result of something that happened on the watch of Pete Wilson. As far as blatant spending goes, you know, the economy nationally and statewide fluctuates. We have good times, we have bad times. We have good times, we have bad times. One of the things that we need to do in California, like they do in business, is we need to have an ability to understand when our economy or how much money we're going to have to spend. Like in a small business, the most important thing you have is predictability. So you can do your 1 year, your 5 year, your 10-year plans. We don't have that kind of system in California. So when we have real lean times, everything gets put on hold. When we have good times, we're trying to play catch-up. I wasn't a big fan of Governor Davis. I thought the way he handled a lot of these programs was wrong. On the other hand, I think that we can't blame Governor Davis for the problems that were created during the administration of Pete Wilson.
Well, certainly Governor Gray Davis didn't cause the energy crisis. And by the way, that bill that my opponent talked about was voted 100%. Democrats and Republicans voted unanimously. My opponent and I were not there. Gray Davis didn't cause the energy crisis, but he didn't help it. When we asked Governor Gray Davis to go to emergency session, he refused. And then when he locked the state into these 15, 20-year long-term power energy contracts, he refused to even disclose how much money it was costing to keep the lights on here in the state of California. I asked Gray Davis to release those documents under the Public Records Act because I believe you have a right to know how much money it is costing to keep the lights on in the state. He refused, so the only thing I thought I could do at the time, I took him to court in a lawsuit, Strickland v. Davis. I took him to court. We won. And by the way, when I decided to take him to court, my Republican colleagues urged me not to do that because they said I was going to end my political career. But I went forward because I thought it was the right thing to do. We won the court case. And what we found out was he locked in higher prices, 15, 20-year contracts at a higher price than the worst price during the spot market. Energy companies came forward because they had bad PR. Energy companies like Enron, they came forward and they renegotiated those contracts, and we saved ratepayers billions of dollars. We need to make sure that we have that kind of leadership. Yes, Gray Davis didn't cause the energy crisis, but he certainly didn't do what he could to make sure that it didn't spiral out of control. And we do still have an energy crisis here in the state of California. We need to get off of foreign oil. We need to be self-sufficient. We need to invest in everything, renewable energy, wind, wave, solar, biodiesel. But we need to bring more power online here in the state of California, and that's what I'm going to do as your next state senator.
I hate to be the bad guy, folks. We have one more question, and then we've got to give a wrap-up. So, young man, you're up. I'm terribly sorry.
Okay, then. My question is, when you go into your polling place, will you vote for or against Prop 8, and why?
So do I start?
Go ahead, Hannah-Beth.
Yeah, I'm going to vote against Proposition 8. I think that the state of California, the Supreme Court, has made its ruling that it is unconstitutional, that we don't want to put into our Constitution, I believe, discrimination. I think that this would be a first time we would do that. I think that's wrong. And now I think we have to focus on the really critical issues affecting our state, which are economy, which how we're going to educate our children, which how we're going to protect our quality of life, how we're going to keep toxins and carcinogens out of our environment that are poisoning our people and causing disease, causing illness and poor health, how we're going to make sure that we are safe in our streets, in our homes, in our schools, with our public safety people, how we're going to deal with the serious problem we have on our whole infrastructure, whether it's water, whether it's energy. We need to, if we're going to really be energy independent, we've got to create a whole new transmission system to transmit that energy that we're going to be creating. Exciting opportunities, but real challenges. How are we going to get our people back to work? How are we going to make sure that we can have controls over these subprime lenders and these predatory lenders that have gone out and destroyed our economy? How are we going to make sure that small business has the opportunity to function and thrive and grow in the state? Those, I think, are the key issues that we're dealing with today, and that's really where I think our time and energy should be spent. Tony?
I agree that we need to spend our time on the economy, renewable energy, but I want to answer the gentleman's question. 61% of California voted for Proposition 22. 4 judges overturned the will of the people. I'm glad that that vote is now coming before us on November 4th, and I will be voting aye for Proposition 8 because I think marriage should be between a man and a woman.
Thank you. I'm so terribly sorry I had to cut off questioning, but it's not your only chance. On next Friday, October 10th, the League of Women and Voters and California Lutheran University and the Ventura Mobile Home Residents Council will be holding their forum at the CLU Oxnard Center at the Palms in Oxnard. And I believe the time is between 4 and 5. Is that correct? So you will get another chance. I really do apologize for this evening. We do have our closing statements. Tony, you're going to lead off. Thank you.
Again, I want to thank, give Joe Howery a round of applause. He did a great job. Thank you. I want to thank CAPS TV. I want to thank the Ventura Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy evening on a Friday night to listen to two opposing views. You know, the good thing about government, I served up there for 6 years, and I believe that my opponent has the best will and intentions, as I believe I do. We just have a different way of looking at how we solve the problems of the state of California. I would be appreciative of your vote on November 4th, and actually, you can actually vote next week on absentee. So if you want to vote for me early, you can.
Just as long as it's not often. Just early, but not often.
Yeah, exactly. The number one issue facing the people of California in the 19th Senate District is our economy. I think it's essential to look at the records of both me and my opponent. The California Chamber has endorsed my campaign, a large portion of our voting record. Our last year in office, I had a 100% voting record. My opponent has 7% voting record. In terms of the National Federation of Independent Business, the voice of small business, I had a 100% record. In our last year in office, my opponent has 0% record. We need to grow this California economy, because if we don't have a strong economy, we can't invest in some of the things we're talking about. I believe our tax structure is, our taxes are too high. We're one of the highest burden tax states in the union. We can't afford to pay higher taxes right now. People are having a tough time making ends meet. We have rising prices of energy costs. We have a tough time to pay our mortgage. And this is the worst time to raise taxes on the people of California. We need to look at the record. We need to look at the record of both me and my opponent. I believe the #1 issue facing you is the economy. Do you want to raise your taxes, or do you want your taxes to not be increased? Do you want to invest in small business? Do you want to make sure that we do whatever we can in Sacramento to do whatever we can to have public-private partnerships? I think it's important to understand how important this race is. This is for the 2/3 majority in Sacramento, and it's so important that Camarillo Chamber of Commerce, your local Camarillo Chamber, and many chambers across the Central Coast have endorsed my campaign. The Camarillo Chamber hasn't endorsed a candidate in 68 years, but they endorsed my campaign because they said this is such an important race for the future economic health of California. The reason why I'm running for office, and I want to thank Hannah-Beth Jackson for running for office, it's not easy, but the reason why I'm running is 2 big reasons. My girl, Ruby Ruth, who turns 3 on October 15th, my boy, Tiny Tony, who just turned 1. I want them to grow up in a California, I'm a California native, I want them to grow up in a California that is the California I grew up in, to do whatever we can to make sure that our community is strong, our California fiscal health is strong, and we can invest in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. If you like that, I appreciate your vote on November 4th. Thank you.
Hannah-Beth, please.
Well, I want to thank everyone, too. I want to thank you all for being here. This is what democracy is all about, a spirited exchange, difference of opinions. I believe if you look very carefully, go back and read the documentation about these various bills, the representations or misrepresentations that have been made. You decide for yourself who is the candidate who is on the side of the people, who's on the side of our families, and who's the candidate who's on the side of big corporations. I believe that California belongs to the people, not to big corporations. I believe that the future is one in which we should all be able to look to our children. I've got one daughter now who's 24 years old. She's in law school. I apologize for that. But the cost of law school today, we are paying $62,000 a year. Think about that. $62,000 a year. Now, you might say, well, that's shame on her for going to law school. Okay, she goes to medical school, it's just as bad. Our young people deserve better than to come out of school either with having their parents go into their retirements or going into debt in order to get the education that each one of us has been able to get without going into debt to do that. Let's talk about the vision of the future for our state. What do we want California to be? That's what we're talking about. I want my daughter to have the same opportunities I had. I want, who, by the way, was born right here at Ventura Community Memorial Hospital. I have 2 grandchildren who live in Santa Barbara and 2 who live in LA. My little grandson who lives in LA has asthma. We don't have any history of asthma in our family. I've got 2 grandchildren I'm blessed to have available to us. We go watch them play ball and do their dancing and do all these kind of things. I want to make sure that they have the same opportunities for a future that I had, that my grandparents promised to my parents, who promised it to me. We need to promise it to them. The way you do that is by education and infrastructure. That is how the economy of this state will stay great. When we talk about the taxes that we pay, nobody likes to pay taxes. I'm not going to increase taxes on the middle class, but I want our big corporations out there to pay their fair share to help us so our kids get the best opportunities they have, so that young man can go on and get his college degree and maybe buy a house and live the American dream. I want to make sure that we have a global planet to live on. We need a planet, but global warming is taking place, and we can't let big corporations decide how we're going to protect against that. We have to go out and we have to work together and say, this is what we must accomplish. How can we work together to get there? I participated with a bipartisan group that tried to work on the budget while my opponent was in there telling his Republican colleagues they were going to take them out. They were going to beat them if they had the audacity to try to vote for a budget in compromise. That is not what we need in Sacramento today. We need thoughtful, serious people who have a vision for this state, who have a vision for this future, who are willing to sit down and make hard decisions. I'm very proud of my career as a prosecutor. I'm very proud of the endorsements I have from the working people in this community, our firefighters, our great heroes, our police officers who keep us safe in our streets, our teachers, our local teachers who are teaching our children. I have great, great, great respect for them, and I'm honored to have their support. Our nurses who take care of us when we're sick, oftentimes because we develop disease and things because we are not doing what we can and what we should be doing to protect our environment from carcinogens. We are not doing what we should to regulate these industries that are running amok, that are bringing in toys that are full of arsenic that our little children are being exposed to, or drinking water that's got perchlorate in it, or pesticides that are drifting over our children's schools. It is our responsibility as legislators to do this job and to say no to these big corporations who say we don't want any regulation. If we had said no to the banking industry back in the year 2000, when my opponent had the chance to say no to them, when I did say no to them, we may very well not be in this mess that we're in today. We talk about our economy. Take a look at who the California Chamber of Commerce is. They are funded primarily by Philip Morris and Chevron. These aren't the mom and pop businesses of Ventura that I was so proud to be a part of. I'm the only candidate in this race who's run a business. I don't care what my opponent says about this company that doesn't have employees. They may not have a type of energy, but they don't have anything. They don't even have a permit. This is not the kind of company we're talking about. I know what it's like to have to pay a payroll. I know what it's like to provide health insurance and to worry if my cash flow is sufficient to keep my business going. I'm very proud to be able to sit here with you and say I did a great deal to try to rejuvenate the city of Ventura, to bring the beach and the community together so we could stimulate jobs and opportunities. Those are the kinds of things I did when I was in the legislature. Those are the kind of things that I want to take back to Sacramento. That's why I would like your vote. I want to keep working for you. I thank you all for being here. Please vote for me November 4th. Thank you very much. Well,
you have been a terrific audience. Bob Albanese. Wrap up here.
Hey, thanks, Joe.